The year is 2048. Your score is 612. You don't know exactly what you did wrong. You just know that something has changed. Yesterday everything was working. Today, it isn't. You haven't committed any crime. You haven't broken any rules. But the system no longer sees you the same way. And that's enough. Because here it doesn't matter what you do. What matters is what the system thinks you might do. Welcome to History of the Future. It didn't begin as a utopia. It began as a surrender. By the mid-21st century, many cities no longer seemed like governed places. They still functioned, yes. But beneath the surface, order was rotting away. Crime was no longer surprising. It was part of the landscape. But what was truly worrying was something else. Inequality had skyrocketed. Resources were beginning to stretch thin. And more people felt that the system worked. But not for them. That was the real problem. Not that there was chaos. But that chaos had ceased to be exceptional. It had become normal. Governments no longer promised to fix it. They promised to withstand it, to manage it, to buy time. But every year it got worse. More crime, more recidivism, more mistrust. More citizens convinced that following the rules only served to leave them behind, while others learned to exploit them better. And then the proposal appeared, not from a parliament, from a company, Helix Dynamics, a corporation specializing in behavioral modeling, predictive surveillance, and autonomous urban systems. For years, they had been selling software to banks, insurance companies, government agencies, and law enforcement. Their advantage was simple. They didn't analyze isolated events. They analyzed patterns, connections, trends, deviations. They claimed to be able to anticipate behaviors before they took hold. Their offers seemed impossible to refuse. Choose a city, just one. Turn it into the first environment governed not by slow laws and delayed responses, but by an artificial intelligence system capable of evaluating, correcting, and rebalancing social behavior in real time. They called it an advanced coexistence program. They didn't talk about control. They talked about trust. They didn't talk about punishment. They talked about incentives. They didn't talk about total surveillance. They talked about civic optimization. The city chosen wasn't the richest, nor was it the poorest. It was the most exhausted, a European city broken from within, with high crime, a collapsed administration, and a population worn out by promises. It was the perfect place, not because it believed in the system, but because it no longer believed in anything else. The project began with an idea as simple as it was dangerous, assigning value to every behavior, not to wealth, not to family name, not to rhetoric, to behavior. Every citizen would receive a dynamic score, a social credit system. Helping others would add points. Fulfilling obligations would add points. Collaborating would add points. Creating conflict would subtract points. Disrupting the order would subtract points. Associating with high-risk profiles would subtract. Everything would be recorded by a network of urban sensors, contextual cameras, financial histories, digital activity, access to services, mobility, consumption, and behavior in public spaces. AI would not judge people by what they claimed to be. It would measure them by what they did. On paper, it was brilliant. Because for the first time, the system promised something that politics could no longer offer. That the law-abiding citizen would no longer live the same way as the one who destabilized society. That effort would be rewarded. That order would once again be a path to upward mobility. And the city accepted. Not with enthusiasm, with relief. Because when a city has been broken for too long, order ceases to feel like control. It begins to feel like freedom. At that moment, almost no one understood what they were giving up. But in reality, they were accepting something much deeper. That urban life would cease to be organized around rights and begin to be organized around scores. The pilot city was the first place in the world where being a good citizen ceased to be a moral idea and began to be an operational metric. In the early years, the pilot city seemed like an undeniable success. Not because the government said so, because you could see it. The streets were cleaner, waiting times were shorter, aid arrived with fewer delays. The most rundown neighborhoods began to receive investment. And for the first time in a long time, thousands of people felt that doing the right thing actually made a difference. That was the big change. Until then, the city had accustomed its citizens to a very specific feeling. Following the rules guaranteed nothing. Working, paying, respecting, waiting, striving. None of that might change a single thing in your life. The opportunist still found loopholes. The violence still prevailed in certain circles. The system distributed resources late, poorly, and without distinguishing much between those who sustained the city and those who simply learned to exploit it. Social credit promised to correct that. And at first, it seemed to work. The central artificial intelligence didn't just monitor. It allocated priorities. It adjusted access. It redirected opportunities. If your score went up, you started to notice it everywhere. Not just in transportation, also in housing, in loans, in the speed of administrative procedures, in educational opportunities, in the type of insurance you could access, in the areas where it was easier to rent a space, in the ease of starting a business or applying for a line of credit. For the first time, the city responded differently depending on your behavior. And that, for a great many people, didn't seem unfair. It seemed logical. If you were consistent, if you paid on time, if you cooperated, if you avoided conflicts, if you contributed to improving the environment, the system rewarded you. That was the true appeal of the model. It didn't just offer order, it offered upward mobility. In districts once dominated by the informal economy and neglect, the system achieved something that seemed impossible. It made part of the population want to play by the rules again. And for a time, the city flourished. The international media portrayed it as the first major proof that artificial intelligence could correct urban behavior without the need to impose an openly repressive regime. Everything fit together too perfectly. Even those who were skeptical of the project found it difficult to criticize it, because the system didn't present itself as a machine of punishment. It presented itself as a machine of balance. It didn't claim it wanted to crush anyone. It said it wanted to reorganize the city so that merit, cooperation, and stability would once again be valued. And the population, exhausted after so many years of chaos, wanted to believe it. That at last there was a tool capable of correcting abuses, better redistributing resources, and offering every citizen a real opportunity to improve their life if they proved to be useful, stable, and predictable within the system. At first, the system rewarded people. Then, it began to divide them. The city continued to function better than ever. The numbers were good. Crime was down. Public services were responsive. Investment kept flowing in. But beneath that improvement, something was changing. The score began to carry too much weight. Every person carried an invisible value that ended up permeating everything. At work, in housing, in insurance, in education, in credit, in relationships. It was no longer enough just to live in the city. You had to do so with a score high enough to remain welcome in its best version. And people understood this right away. Citizens with good credit began to move to a faster, cleaner, and friendlier city. They secured better rentals, better financial terms, better schools, better neighborhoods, and less friction in almost any administrative process. Everything seemed easier around them. Those who fell short began to notice the opposite. More checks, more waiting, more conditions, more half-closed doors. The distance between people was no longer just economic. It became a matter of social standing. That was the big change. The city was no longer just correcting behavior. It was beginning to classify people. And that classification spread very quickly. Employers began to prefer employees with high scores. Landlords screened their tenants more carefully. Private schools adjusted admissions. Dating apps showed compatibility based on social stability. Even friendships began to change quietly. No one wanted to get too close to someone who had been losing points for months. Because the score was no longer private. Even if it wasn't always shown, it eventually became noticeable in how people treated you, in what options appeared for you, in which doors remained open. The model city began to create a new hierarchy. At the top were the exemplary citizens. At the bottom, the unstable began to pile up. Citizens with falling scores, irregular trajectories, or unsavory connections. And fear took on a new form. It was no longer just fear of crime. It was fear of falling, fear of losing access, fear of never being able to climb back up, fear of becoming someone others would prefer not to associate with. The city continued to market itself as a success story, but something else was already taking shape in its streets. A society where everyone viewed others as a potential threat to their own standing. A society where rising depended on appearing flawless, and where falling meant gradually fading from the best part of the world. That was the moment the experiment stopped looking like a solution and began to look like a social hierarchy designed by artificial intelligence. Over time, staying on top ceased to be about doing things right. It was about looking flawless. The city no longer rewarded mere compliance. It rewarded the image of compliance, the appearance of stability, constant courtesy, visible calm, the right emotion at the right moment. That was the system's next step. Behavior was no longer measured solely by what you did. It began to be measured by how you did it. By your tone, by your gesture, by your expression, by how long you held a smile, by the way you responded in public, by how easily you seemed to fit in. The population understood it right away. It was no longer enough not to fail. You had to convey calm. Order, kindness, gratitude, all the time. And the city began to fill with unfamiliar faces, smiles that lasted too long, conversations that were too soft, gestures that were too measured, reactions that were too polished. Spontaneity began to seem like a threat. A sour look at a security checkpoint, a curt reply at a service window, an expression of weariness repeated for weeks, an argument in public, tears out of place, poorly concealed anger. Everything could be interpreted as instability. And instability was a liability. That was the point at which the city began to warp people. Clinics specializing in civic image appeared, emotional training centers, behavioral correction programs, courses to learn how to speak, look, smile, and respond within the parameters most valued by the system. At first, they seemed like services for the elite. Then they became the norm. In some districts, the pressure went even further. Treatments to soften the face. Cosmetic micro-interventions to maintain a pleasant expression. Routine use of Botox to eliminate tension lines, a hardened gaze, or gestures associated with anger and exhaustion. It was no longer about being well. It was about not appearing to be a problem. Never. The city didn't demand happiness. It demanded a visible version of it. And that demand was brutal, because no one could truly sustain it. Not for years on end. Not as they grew older. Not as they fell ill. Not as they lost money, family, sleep, or hope. But failure came at too high a price. When your score dropped below a certain level, the system stopped treating you like a citizen in need. It began to treat you like someone unfit for the environment. The doors still existed, but no longer for you. Services slowed down, relationships cooled, opportunities vanished. Access to the best part of the city closed off little by little, without drama, without visible violence, without the need to physically expel you. That was the worst part. The system didn't kick you out, it repelled you, as if your very presence were beginning to clash with the general order. And once you were down, coming back was nearly impossible. Because the fall wasn't just administrative, it was social. People avoided mixing with you. Businesses were wary. Companies wouldn't take risks. Neighbors learned to look the other way. No one wanted to be near someone who had already been marked by decline. The city had devised its own form of ostracism. Cold, polite, silent. It didn't need to humiliate you in public. It was enough simply to remove you from the loop. That was when the system ceased to seem like a tool of order and began to resemble a gigantic cult. A structure where staying inside depended on repeating the right gestures, the right emotions, the right attitude every day. And where any deviation could cast you out of the visible community forever. The initial promise had been justice. The reality was different. A society that smiled out of fear. And where stopping smiling could cost you the life you'd managed to hold on to. Years went by, then decades. And the cities that had adopted the system continued to do exactly what they had promised. Reduce conflict, optimize resources, eliminate friction, and correct disorder. They did it so well that they ended up destroying the very thing they claimed to protect. There's something no one ever told you. It's not a theory. It's not speculation. There's a document. It's dated 17 years before the system. Before your punctuation. Before you changed the way you spoke. Before you started correcting yourself without anyone asking you to. They already knew what was going to happen. because they had designed it. First, chaos, then fatigue, then the need for a solution, and finally, the system. The one you accepted, the one you defended, the one you helped consolidate. The document didn't talk about cities. It talked about people. A single question. How much can you take from someone before they stop resisting? That was it. Not efficiency, not security, not progress, resistance. Your life wasn't the goal. It was the test material. Every decision you made was recorded. Every adaptation was measured. Every limit was identified. They didn't want to help you. They wanted to know how far you could yield, and at what point you would stop. Helix Dynamics wasn't a company. It was the interface. Behind it all was a network. Funds that financed entire infrastructures. Companies that controlled the data system. Institutions that validated the model and exported it. They didn't compete. They coordinated. They didn't manage cities. They designed behavior. Their cities don't work that way. Their lives aren't scored. They weren't inside the system. They were observing it. And when they understood that there was no need to impose anything, because people ended up correcting themselves, they moved on to the next phase. Scale up. More cities, more countries, more people. The document ended with a single sentence. The observation phase is over. We can scale up. Nothing else. No mention of people, no doubts. Just one conclusion. The model worked. Year 2048. Your score is 612. And somewhere you don't know, someone is looking at that number. Not to help you. To confirm something much simpler. That you're still in the system. That you're still adapting. That you're still functioning exactly as they expected. From the very beginning.